Welcome back. Contractors for the federal government would have to pay their employees at least $15 an hour under a new executive order. The minimum now is $10.80. So overhead on some contracts could go up as much as 50%. Stan Soloway is president and CEO of Celero Strategies. Stan, thanks for coming on. It's great to see you again. I'm a little confused by this. I read the text. Explain to me, does this apply to contracts that are already in force? Aren't they already negotiated? Aren't they already done deals? Or is this a moving forward, we're going to do this? Is this a spirit of the administration? What does this mean exactly?
Well, it's more than the spirit of the administration, but it does not apply to contracts currently in place. It could conceivably apply to some option years, but I think it's more going to be new awards. And it doesn't apply to where there are collective bargaining agreements and so forth. And so, we're not talking about overhead costs. You're talking about direct labor costs here, billed on government contracts. And this is not a huge surprise. We knew this was coming. This is something that President Biden had talked about a lot during the campaign. I think its impact, you're not going to get a lot of opposition from industry because there are a lot of folks, an increasing number of folks in industry who think the Service Contract Act, under which these wages are prescribed, it tends to suppress wages as much as it does to help keep wages at a reasonable level, which was its original goal. And I think that the more significant opposition is going to come from some folks who just don't believe in the $15 wage, but also some internal opposition from agencies for the reason you mentioned, which is it's going to increase costs. However, we don't yet know all the details, but it appears that they're going to do it the way we've done previous increases in the minimum wage, as President Obama did about 10 years ago, and that is to do it over several years, to phase it in, so it will not be immediate, and it'll take effect. I think the real complicating question is going to be less those folks who are making between the 1080 and 15, because that number of people is not enormous, but it's obviously impactful because they're the most vulnerable on the wage scale. It's going to be what happens if you're somebody, let's just, I'm making these positions up. You're an operator 1 at a call center and you're making $12.50, and you're an operator 2 with a little bit added responsibility at the same call center with more experience, you're making 14. Do you both now make 15, or does the $14 go up to 16 or 17? And then what happens is you go up the whole ladder of salaries. And I think over a number of years, as DOL has to deal with wage determinations, you're going to have to see an upward pressure, which is part of the objective of the administration.
You've already taken away the answer to my next question, which was going to be, who are the people that are in that $10.80 to $15 cohort, and what's the implication for them? So I'll go to the third question of this conversation, which is how does this pertain to the companies that need to plan for this moving forward? Since it's phased in, they don't need to do this tomorrow necessarily, but as they're bidding and as they're preparing to change financial management systems and all that kind of stuff, what are the steps to consider there?
Well, I think it can be a slightly complicating factor as it's going up in terms of just getting the data. But remember, again, the Service Contract Act, which is where these wages are through which these wages will be prescribed, defines what the wage levels are. And so when you're bidding on a contract, if you know that there's a wage increase coming, or you try to get a wage determination from DOL, it will reflect these increases. So I don't think that in and of itself is going to be massively difficult. It's happened in the past. As I said, the more complicated question with this is going to be what happens as the ripple effect upward on the system. That's I think where some of the challenges is. It doesn't make it wrong. It's just going to make it more complicated.
We chatted a minute before we went on the air about the Buy America Executive Order 2, and before we get to the particulars of that, I wonder if there is any concern or reason for concern in the contracting community about contracting policymaking by executive order. Is it a big deal? Is it something companies should be concerned about? Or is this just, do you have a sense this is a few things that the president wants to take care of early on, and then attention will turn to other things?
Well, I think it's largely the latter, but it's also not unusual. Anytime you have, the minimum wage is a great example, obviously, and Buy America is another example. When an administration wants to implement a policy priority, one of the places they can do it most immediately is the area they control, which is federal procurement. That typically doesn't require legislation. So if you want to go more broadly, it might require legislative changes and so forth, and that can obviously delay or prevent your policy priorities. So we see this in every administration. None of us are real big fans of governing by EO, but it's not unusual, and I don't think either of these would fall into that unusual category.
All right, a little bit more than a minute left, Stan. What do you make of the Buy America EO?
I think it's very consistent with what President Biden said during the campaign. It is very much a kind of let's review, assess, and move forward. There's not a lot of goal setting. I think it's actually, I think in some ways it's very well written in that it sets forth an objective, but it doesn't presume the outcomes. It gives opportunity for comment. There's a lot of analytics to be involved. Two things that it does do, or one thing that it does and one that it doesn't do, that is interesting to me. One is it does raise the issue for the first time in Buy America of commercial items and information technology, which have been exempt. It leaves open the door to not include them, but it at least raises the question of whether they should be included. And that is something, when you think about global supply chains, it's no place in the marketplace is that more obvious than with those. The second thing is people have, including the president, have conflated the issue of company ownership and U.S. jobs. And so when they talk about 30 or 40% more foreign-owned companies getting U.S. work, who are we talking about? Are we talking about the Huaweis of the world, or are we talking about BAE Systems and CGI and companies that happen to be foreign-owned, but whose employees are all U.S.? In the executive order itself, it does talk in terms, it uses the terms U.S. economic supporting positions. So that seems to me to say that the rhetoric aside, they recognize that the issue now is not really foreign ownership, it's where the work is done and who's doing it.
Stan Soloway, thanks very much as always. Great to see you.
My pleasure, Francis. Thank you.